The vulgar tongue. Damasus was keen on Rome, and Rome spoke Latin. But one of the things that was bothering him was the state of the Latin Bible. By now the Bible was available in a number of Latin translations, now known as Old Latin versions. Probably originating in North Africa, they were colloquial, even slangy at times. For example, the Old Testament translation of Luke 13:8 has the vineyard keeper declaring, "I will chuck on a basket of dung." Only in Latin, obviously. Damasus felt that for the West to compete with the East, they needed a proper, grand, grown-up Bible. And there was only one man for the task, his personal secretary, Jerome, circa 347 to 420. Jerome's real name was Sophronius Eusebius Hieronymus. You can see why people prefer to use Jerome. He was a clever child, and when only 12 he was sent to Rome to study rhetoric, philosophy and classical literature. In 373 he nearly lost his life when he fell ill during a journey into northern Syria. During this illness he had a vision calling him to put aside his study of secular pagan literature and devote himself to God and to the Bible. So that's what he did. When he recovered, he headed for the desert, where he became a hermit. Well, sort of, since he records that apparently he was often present at dances with girls. But in between doing the samba, he had the time and solitude to study, and in particular, he started to learn Hebrew from a converted Jew. Jerome became a talented linguist. Augustine, who we'll meet in a minute, depending on the speed of your reading, or whether you take a break in the meantime, Augustine called him a three-language man on the basis of his knowledge of Greek, Latin, and Hebrew. It's a sign of how far Christianity had come since the days of the New Testament writers, that hardly any of its adherents in the West spoke Greek anymore, let alone Hebrew. Augustine himself knew only a few fragments of Greek and hardly any Hebrew. Jerome eventually returned to Rome, where he became secretary to Damasus. It was then that Damasus suggested Jerome should work on a kind of revised Latin version, which would then become the standard. Jerome set to work, and published his revision of the Gospels in 383, followed by his correction of the Old Latin Book of Psalms, which had become known as the Roman Psalter. In his preface to Damasus, written to accompany the revision of the Gospels, he wrote, "You urge me to sit in judgment on the copies of the Scriptures which are now scattered throughout the whole world. How can I dare to change the language of the world in its hoary old age and carry it back to the early days of its infancy?" He put his finger on a real issue. The old Latin Bibles may have been slangy, error-prone, and just plain wrong as translations, but they were familiar, much loved, slangy, error-prone, and just plain wrong translations. So Jerome faced some opposition. Things weren't made any easier by his complete lack of tact. His polemical writings are always on the abusive side of outspoken. He called those opposing his changes, for example, two-legged donkeys, and that was one of the milder insults. His outspokenness rebounded on him when Damasus died. Without a high-level protector, Jerome's opponents rounded on him. He was accused of having an improper relationship with a widow, and caught up in the Roman equivalent of a tabloid scandal. He was forced to flee the city, accompanied by his brother, a priest, and some other monks. He eventually settled in Bethlehem, where he continued his revision of the Bible. But after a visit to Caesarea to consult Origen's famous Hexapla, he became convinced that what was actually needed was to start again from scratch, and to retranslate the Old Testament from the Hebrew. This was a radical move. The Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew Scriptures, was the Bible of the Greek-speaking East. For both Jews and Christians, it had attained the status of a divinely inspired translation. The legend said that God had inspired 70 translators to come up with the same text independently. Jerome was having none of it. He went back to the Hebrew, and then he found another problem. The Septuagint had more books than the Hebrew Scriptures. So Jerome reclassified these books and gave them the group title Apocrypha, meaning hidden. Most of them he didn't even translate. He did translate Esdras and the Greek parts of Daniel, Tobit and Judith, but left all the others. He finished his work around 406, and it was published to immediate and widespread apathy. It took a long time for Jerome's work to gain traction. In fact, it wasn't until some 400 years later that it became the de facto Latin version used by the Catholic Church. And it took a further 700 years or so before it was given the name by which it is still known, the Vulgate, from the Latin word for common, meaning used by everyone, not coarse and vulgar, obviously. And at the Council of Trent in 1545, nearly 1,200 years after the work was commissioned, the Catholic Church finally declared Jerome's Vulgate to be the authorised Bible of the Catholic Church. Well, you don't want to rush these things, do you?